Well, hello, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining from. I am really glad you guys could join us this week. It is Thursday, August 8th. It's 1 p.m. local time. And I hope you're strapped in and ready for our freight market roundup. So we got no visuals. If you've been joining us, you know that. But I do make it easy to digest. At least I think I do, especially some of the complicated ideas happening in the transportation markets globally. So if this is your first time joining, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jason Brand. I am the Director of Outreach and Partner Development here at Supply Chain Solutions. Now, a little word on Supply Chain Solutions. We are a full service logistics provider. Technically speaking, we're a supply chain provider because we literally handle every link in the chain when it comes from shipping to actually on a yearly basis, more than 150 different countries, but we can handle every single portion of your shipment. We've got layers of technology we've been working on literally since our fruition to kind of connect each piece in a beautiful way. Now we've got dashboards we can spit out, we can customize to you. We've got inventory management locations all around the US and beyond. And yeah, we're having a ball. Now, granted, this year is an interesting year in general, but we've had a really good time with some of our customers, kind of redesigning what they think about shipping and how they should ship and so on and so forth. It's a great time to talk to us. So give us a call. You can reach out to me directly. You can go straight to our website and reach out to one of my teammates. We'd love to talk to you. Now, before we begin our freight market roundup, there's a couple things I want to go through. As I said, we don't have visuals. So if you're normally here, you would know I normally like to go through kind of an agenda of sorts to make sure if you're lost, you can figure out where we're headed or where you are. So first things first, we are going to start with the ocean shipping portion. We're going to talk about 4 major shipping lanes we like to run through. We'll discuss prices that we're seeing on the lanes, along with what our expectations are for what's going to happen going forward. Next thing I'm going to do is talk about some of the major events that are affecting the transportation marketplace or have the potential to do so. And then finally, we're going to wrap everything up with a talk about the air freight market. We specifically focus on our Southeast Asia and China shipments into the U.S. for the air freight market. And we'll talk about specifically what we're seeing from the lows, the highs, and the averages for our customers. Now, final thing before we begin. So there is a substantial amount of political unrest happening at the moment. And it's happening all around the globe. We've currently got a situation that's evolving rapidly in Bangladesh. It's led to the prime minister resigning, fleeing the country as well. And then also we've got these massive protests in Nigeria and Venezuela, both of which have become violent, leading to the death of some protesters. On top of that, we've got a huge rioting situation happening in the UK. And this is not all. And I want to say these right now because I'm not going to dive into these topics. And, they do deserve being talked about. But we're going to kind of just leave it at that. These inevitably are going to spill into the transportation markets at some point. When they start to do so, I'll bring them up in a little bit more depth and we'll talk about them a little bit more. But for today, we got a couple other things I want to mention. So let's stay focused. Let's dive right into that ocean market. Let's talk about the rates our customers were seeing as of last week. So if you're shipping between Southeast Asia and China and you're going into the US West Coast, we call this our Trans-Pacific lane, you're likely noticing this very nice trend of prices heading downwards. So right now, our customers are paying an average of $6,500 per 40-foot equivalent unit, which as a reminder, that's FEU for short. And that was as of last week. So yes, my opinion on this 6,500, it's definitely too expensive compared to what it should be for that ocean portion. But, I and others are really trying to celebrate the fact that it is heading in the right direction and that we also thankfully dodged that $10,000 shipment mark, which would have been the second time in 5 years shippers would have had to pay those just outrageous prices. And quite frankly, that's just unacceptable. And, we talked about this the past couple of weeks. I'm hoping that some of these new moves and some of the new teeth that the FMC has gotten can help stabilize this market a little bit more, just for the sake of business planning, because it's already been hard enough to manage overseas suppliers. That's always a challenge. But then when you add in the seesawing we're seeing across the board with tariffs and, just throw on top of that a volatile shipping market, it's just bad for business in general. So I am hoping this can kind of get under wraps. We discussed some of the reasons behind this recent kind of surge in prices, but we're going to be watching this. So make sure you're joining every week. Now let's move on, but we're going to move on to our honorable mention lane. We brought this in earlier in the year because it's kind of an interesting one. And that is our Southeast Asia and China shipments that are headed into the Mexican West Coast. Now, the trend here is very similar. What we mentioned the other week is it's kind of like a little bit of a canary in the coal mine. And it's that way, at least for the time being. And it's signaling what's going to happen on the West Coast rates for us. Now, I do want to kind of go down a bit of a rabbit hole because the side note here is that it won't be holding that title for much longer. It's done a great job so far. When it shot up in price, what did we see? The U.S. West Coast shipments also shoot up in price. When it started to head downwards just a couple weeks before, we saw the same thing. The slope's always been steeper, but that makes sense given the market, given why it's doing these things. Now, that side note of it not continuing to be the canary in the coal mine is very true. We just had that legislation passed about Chinese shipments headed into Mexico, crossing into the U.S., kind of trying to tariff dodge. And that new legislation really focusing on ensuring that those goods do not dodge tariffs. That will affect this canary in the coal mine effect. Also, we've got these ILA labor negotiations. Depending on the outcome of those negotiations, depending on what happens, particularly on September 30th, we are going to likely see a very big divide between what's happening in Mexico and what's happening in the U.S. West Coast, simply because, well, the East Coast ports could be under strike. Anyway, dove down that rabbit hole. Let's kind of get back into it. So again, we're talking about our Asian origin shipments, Southeast Asia and China, headed into the Mexican West Coast. Last week, we saw our customer average cost decrease to roughly $5,300. Now, as a means of comparison, remember our U.S. West Coast lane was $6,500 as of last week. Now, it's very highly likely that this trend of decreasing shipment costs going into the West Coast of Mexico is going to continue. So keep that in mind. Let's keep rocking and rolling. Let's move on. Let's go over to our transatlantic shipments. So let's talk about the shipments leaving European ports heading into specifically the U.S. East Coast. Now, if you've been watching our show regularly, I bet your educated guess will be correct on what this shipment cost is going to be because we've talked about it week over week over week. And if you said, hey, Jason, it's going to be a slow and steady decrease this week, you'd be absolutely correct. So we are currently, our customers are paying around $1,760 per 40-foot equivalent unit. That's FEU, as a reminder again. And honestly, if we are seeing any changes, it's that the slope might be increasing. So it is decreasing at an increasing rate. And just a hair though. It's really we're in a situation with this price of $1,760 per FEU that we are just dangerously close to the cost floor. So when that happens, when you get right down there based on when they're not making any money per shipments, the most expected thing in the world occurs, and that's that you get bad service. You have issues along the line of that shipment. It does not come in on time. The sailing is pushed. There's just issues that occur across the board. So if you're finding yourself shipping on this lane, we would encourage you to consider some of the premium services. Talk to your logistics provider. Talk to us about what options there are, who is showing up to be the most reliable. And if it's a little bit more, if you're spending $2,500 right now on that lane, you're going to be much better off than if you're getting the bottom of the barrel rate. You could be dealing with much more heartache than it's worth. And that's just because you get too close to that cost floor and things get so funky. We've seen this before. We just saw this very recently. Pandemic really showed us a lot of things, but that was one of them. At one point, let's just say that, because obviously it was really the other end. But anyway, now let's wrap up this ocean rate discussion and let's end on our final lane we like to talk about. That is our Chinese or Southeast Asian origin shipments that were headed previously through the Suez. Now we'll just call it the around the world in 80 days lane because it takes so long to get through it. But anyway, now this lane, actually, we are getting some good news from this lane. And we saw this a little bit earlier. So it has leveled off a little bit in price. Now, the other lanes are really doing one of two things. Actually, most of the lanes in the world at this moment, most are headed downwards. This lane is heading downwards, but at a very, very incremental pace. Basically, at the beginning of the month, this lane was $100 more than it is now. So as of last week, our customers are paying, and by beginning of the month, I meant beginning of last month. So right now, our customers are paying $8,300. It was $8,450 in the beginning of July. That's per 40-foot container. So, it's moving slow. When you really look at that as far as a percentage, it's like less than 2%. So it's really not a robust move. That could be just a jitter. So, keep in mind that it's up there. It's likely going to stay up there. There's a lot of reasons for it being up there in price. So unfortunately, if you are, beholden to this lane, you sort of got to deal with it right now. We are seeing a lot of air freight movement in this area, which totally makes sense. And, I'll get into this in a little bit, but the air freight market is actually at a pretty good, it's hard for me to say good price because it has been pretty high this year in comparison. But if we just look at this year in general, it's at a great spot. And it is actually trending slightly downward despite there being plenty of volume. But we, again, as I said, we'll dive into that in a minute. So let's get into some of the market stuff going on because we've got some big news here. So first and foremost, we have a hurricane / tropical storm. And I say / because it was a hurricane. Now it's a tropical storm, but it's really wreaking havoc. This is Debbie. It's moving up the East Coast. It is causing substantial damage. So we've got ports in Florida and in Georgia. They're closed. Wilmington Harbor in North Carolina, it's been closed as well. That started yesterday. Debbie is causing widespread flooding from Virginia, and AccuWeather is expecting that to go all the way up to Maine. AccuWeather is also predicting this is going to easily be a $1 billion disaster. So that's terrible news. And currently, if we just look at the impacts, we've got more than 110,000 people in Florida without power. You've got 20,000 more in Georgia without power and 19,000 more in South Carolina without power. President Biden did approve an emergency disaster declaration in Florida. Georgia's governor, Brian Kemp, they've issued a state of emergency. And, if we just look at kind of transportation wise, you've had, since the beginning of this week, 1,400 delayed flights and 300 canceled flights. That number is expected to increase. So definitely having a major effect right now, given a tropical storm nature versus a hurricane. Likely the cleanup should be faster, but this is kind of hitting a lot of spots at this point. So keep your fingers crossed. And let's move on. Now, I did mention I wasn't going to talk about the political unrest, but there is one area I have to discuss. That is Bangladesh. Quite frankly, it is already causing major supply chain problems. And, it's just got a lot of strings attached to it right now, quite frankly. So you've got Chittagong Port. It's the main gateway for Bangladesh. This is ocean trade market. And it's almost entirely shut down at this point. There is reported very minimal shoreside activity for the vessels that were lucky enough to berth or unlucky enough to berth, depending on how you look at it. The rail link that is between the harbor and Dhaka, it's completely not functioning. And to really kind of throw salt in this wound, the inland transportation networks have actually been degrading, I think is the best way of putting it. They've been falling apart since early June. So that's been kind of a long time coming. At this point, they're almost completely shut down as well. And it's really complicating the situation. So talking to carriers and through kind of their statements, Maersk, One Network Express, both have considered canceling all of their Chittagong sailings until conditions improve. And then, it's kind of funny to even consider this, but looking at the rate standpoint, nothing's moving, but let's see how much it costs to move nothing. But it is a good indication of supply and demand, right? What's going on in that area. So the spot rates going into or out of Chittagong are just insane at the moment. We've got, if you're shipping from Bangladesh to the U.S. East Coast, you're looking at $12,500 per 20-foot container, or nearly $14,000 for a 40-foot. And if you're going to the much closer Europe, you're looking at $10,000, actually close to $11,000 per 20-foot, and around $12,250 for a 40-foot. So that's just an indication of how messy things are at that point, kind of just confirming those statements and such. Now, Maersk, this is a big dilemma. So the timing of this breakdown is really hard on some of these ocean liners. Oh, I feel so sad for them. but no, seriously, it really is, because they just did a bunch of expansions into Bangladesh, specifically increased their services. Maersk has been pouring funds into there for years just to expand their on the shore capabilities. And it's, kind of at this point, just not happening. So Maersk currently operates 4 weekly connections, and they have 1 biweekly loop out of Chittagong. They've also, as I mentioned, they've got that extensive landside infrastructure that they've, poured their funding into to really help them operate in the country. And so I guess the natural question is like, why is all of this happening, and why was Maersk doing this? Why were the new services being added? What is all this going on? Well, a lot of this additional transportation support that they've just recently been enjoying, it's because their garment exports have just been booming. So in 2023, they had a 10% year over year increase. It brought them to an all-time high of 47 billion. And it's really highlighting the trade diversification potential of Bangladesh when you're looking around Asia. So, the carriers noticed that. They supported it. They came in. They tried to financially kind of build themselves up. And at this moment, it's all crumbling. So very, very sad, very stressful moment. We're going to have to watch this over the next few weeks and just see how these pieces are put back together. Now, if you watch this show for a while, we really don't like to just talk about bad news. I really try to find some silver linings to things because, quite frankly, there is a lot of dramatic things occurring. There is a lot of disruptions we see, but there's also a lot of improvement and advancement and stuff just that's going well. And we are progressing forward, which is very cool at the same time. Now, I don't have one of those super glorious stories such as that, but what I do have is a statement from Maersk's CEO. And it's a good statement. It's like a glimmer of hope. So Vincent Clerc, Maersk CEO, he is betting that the ILA strike on the East Coast and Gulf Coast ports won't happen. And that I kind of got to laugh at, but it's a very interesting point of view. And it'd be very cool if it doesn't happen. But it's been kind of talked about since the very beginning of these conversations. That being said, we're going to take this as the silver lining. We hope it is. And hope he's got some insider knowledge in that statement. So, yeah. Anyway, so their contract expiration date is on September 30th. They've made it very clear over the course of the year that they will strike on that day if the contract is not signed. Keeping this in the silver lining tone, trying to at least. And they are seeking, and maybe this is the silver lining side, they are seeking a lot. So they are looking for a almost 80% wage increase over their next contract cycle. And if they don't get that, they are going to strike. That was it's kind of said. So the CEO has essentially said, he really feels like a contract of this manner is going to take time anyways. It's obviously been a while, but he's really expecting it's going to be an extension before it'd be a strike. And if it is a strike, it would obviously happen later and be of less severity. Also, the situation in the ILA with the ILA on the East Coast is in many ways infinitely more complex than the ILWU on the West Coast. Now, they both had their massive complexities and they both had their little side arguments that happened that really stalled things. But you've got certain ports on the East Coast that don't use union labor. And then that whole piece got thrown into it. That just was a big monkey wrench of trying to get those ports to use union labor, which obviously complicates this contract process. But anyway, so September 30th is the date. And, make sure you keep that in mind. We have to talk about this every week as we move towards this because it is a huge potential for disruption. So stay tuned. We'll keep talking about it. We'll keep you updated. We'll see if Mayor CEO is right. And if he is, going to have to give him a shout out. Now, there's another thing I did not mention that was massive news. And I kind of didn't do it on purpose, but so Iran's president has been confirmed dead. I'm going to leave it at that for right now. But from a transportation standpoint, really don't expect to be using the Suez Canal anytime soon. Probably not until 2025. That area right now is just so hot. And we're going to have to watch this, but I really just want to leave it at that for this timing. So let's move on. Let's go to the air freight market. So currently, if you are shipping air and you're coming out of Southeast Asia and China and you're shipping into the US, our customers are paying on average $6.03 a kilo. And when we look across all of the origin and destination pairs as of last week, what we saw was a low of $5.40 a kilo was happening and a high of $6.44 was happening. So you've kind of got that range we were witnessing as of last week. Quite frankly, this is really good for this year. We've seen this go substantially higher, well into the sevens. And granted, we don't like these prices being this high in general. You compare this to Europe and your head will explode. But that being said, if you do ship air, if you need to ship air, it's a good time to ship air. So keep that in mind. So that's what we got for you today. Under 20 minutes, just by a hair. So I'm going to get this show off before I hit that 20-minute mark, but I really appreciate you guys joining. Thank you so much. Catch you next week.